Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the first episode proper of this 10th season of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. I'm not going to waste too much time with preamble this week, as I really just want to dig into the first track from Tom's second solo album and the 10th album overall of his career. We'll talk lots over the coming 15 weeks about inspiration and perspiration in equal measure, and I think there's plenty of both in this week's song. That said, I do want to very quickly give a shout out to my friend Chaz Charles, who's just wrapped season 2 of his Regarding series of podcasts. The tagline for that show is, "We listen so you don't have to." So it's kind of the opposite to my show, and especially this season. Chaz and his pal Wolfie take on an album every season that isn't universally adored and talk about each track in order. The current season, Regarding Roger, features their dissection of Roger Waters' Dark Side of the Moon Redux. Dark Side's an album I adore, and the Redux is, well, let's just say it's different. Chaz very graciously invited me onto his season wrap episode a couple of weeks ago, and I had a great time digging into, what would drive an artist to go back and re-record a classic album, something I'm 100% sure Tom would never have considered in a million years. Regarding Roger is an avant-garde art rock approach to podcasting that's brilliantly conceived by Chaz. And if you find it a little bewildering at first, do stick with it, because the themes and the in-jokes in the show all coalesce into a whole that is every bit as interesting, eclectic, and unusual as the album it covers. If you want to check that out, I've left a link for that in the episode notes for you. Enough about other podcasts, though. Let's get going. Today's episode, of course, covers the incredible title track to 1994's Wildflowers. Wildflowers is one of only 2 albums in the Tom Petty catalogue that opens with the titular song. You have to think that as soon as this song came to Tom, he knew that it would be the album title and would crystallise its entire theme and mood. Tom's records to this point had come blazing out of the gate with either an all-out rocker and or an iconic lead single. Wildflowers is neither of those things. What it is, however, is a serious statement of intent. If ever a song summed up the album you were about to hear, it's Wildflowers. And of course, that's not to say that every track from the album has this specific tempo or pared down feel, but from the very first track, the album does open up like a flower. You could open this album with You Wreck Me or Cabin Down Below, or You Don't Know How It Feels even, and it would be understandable, but it would be the wrong foundation to build the rest of the album out from. Wildflowers simply has to be the lead track, and I'll talk about the main reason I think that is later in the episode. In Paul Zollo's essential book, Conversations with Tom Petty, when the author asks Tom about Wildflowers, Tom reveals the following. "I swear to God, it's an absolute ad-lib from the word go. I turned on my tape deck, picked up my acoustic guitar, took a breath, and played that from start to finish, and then sat back and went, whoa, what did I just do? And I listened to it. I didn't change a word. Everything was just right there off the top of my head." Now, lots of artists have discussed songs that come fully formed or with very little effort, and they always say that they're outliers. I mean, I wrote a song called No Good For You that came very, very quickly and had only one lyrical revision that I can remember once I hit the recording studio. But for anyone, even Tom, to write a song this good in one take is truly extraordinary. As I discussed in episode 0 for this season, I'm going to be covering the outtakes and home recordings from Wildflowers in a future season, so I won't go into forensic detail about the differences between the demo and the final product unless I think it's important for the context of the song. The demo for this song, however, does reveal that the recollections Tom had in 2004 and 2005 when he sat down to discuss his work with Paul Zollo were basically spot on. The verse and chorus from this song and the entirety of the lyric is identical. There was no tweaking needed in the melody and very little even in the intonation and phrasing vocally. It's one of those songs that seems to have just existed, waiting for the right conduit to find its way through and out into the world. Of course, the song does come from within Tom, not without, but that sense of universal harmony and things just coming together so perfectly is part of the reason why I think this song had to open the album. The song opens and proceeds through this initial chorus with only that wonderful acoustic guitar shuffle. In the liner notes for Wildflowers and All the Rest, Mike Campbell describes this as Tom's ching, chinka, 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 ching rhythm. When you say it out loud, it's a great way of describing it. It's a very simple guitar part, capoed on the 5th fret with some lovely hammer-ons to give that part the signature feel that it has. And if hammer-on means nothing to you, why would it if you're not a guitarist or a musician? It's when the guitarist plays a note without striking the string, but instead just hits the note with the finger on the fretboard. And this is what it sounds like. You can hear the initial chord being strummed, then that individual note that isn't picked, but rather hammered on. So the first 2 chords and that 4th chord, doo-doo, doo-doo, has that hammer on. It's very cool. It's a very distinctive part, and it has a beauty and a lightness to it that just makes me smile every time I hear it, especially when I hear it unexpectedly. Tom's vocal delivery here is very restrained and raw, and Tom tells Paul Zollo, the production of that record intimidates me. It's so well done that I find myself in competition with it all the time. One of the things that really sets this song apart, and again, sets up the rest of the album so crucially, is the emphasis on showcasing Tom's voice, without too much affectation or processing. That vocal is so crystal clear and present that you can almost hear Tom's lips coming back together between each syllable. It's like he's sitting across the kitchen table from you, just playing this song on his guitar. I'll end up saying this a lot, I'm sure, this season, but for me, this is the best produced album in Tom's catalogue and one of the greatest accomplishments in that area in the history of recording. That might sound like a lofty claim, but right from the outset, not only is the quality of songwriting and performance exceptional, but the way those performances are captured and the songs honed is pretty much peerless for me. After starting with the chorus, the song moves into the first verse and we have the introduction of the bass guitar, played by Mike Campbell, and Ben Montench's piano part, and much more on Ben Mont's contribution to this song a little later. There's a wonderful separation of those 2 parts that's created by the fact that the piano is played high up on the keyboard initially. It allows you to fully hear the simple root notes that Mike's playing on the bass, all the while that wonderful rhythm guitar propelling the song forward through the chord progression. Once the next chorus comes in, Ben Mont drops down an octave and plays full chords on the root notes, matching the bass right up until the 109 point, when he plays a simple little lick that just makes me happy. I'm sure we all have songs or just little parts of songs that make us smile, and that's one of the ones in this song. It's such a wonderful mimicking of the shuffle that Tom's playing, but it isn't overdone. It's just 2 counts in the middle of the bar to fill in the space between those chords. We also have some percussion, a tambourine shake, I think, added in here, which is played by the prolific percussionist Lenny Castro. In the Wildflowers box set notes, Rick Rubin says of the recording process for this one that we recorded Mike and Tom playing guitar together, with Steve, that's Steve Ferroni, keeping time on the hi-hat. So already you can see that for all the inspiration that drives this song, and for me, especially the lyric, there's a lot of craft that also happened. Steve's hat was taken out of the final mix up to this point, and unless it's sitting just under percussion, I'm not too sure. I can't quite hear that clearly enough, but I don't think it is. But anyway, all these extra textures and moments are dubbed in later, actually back in Mike Campbell's home studio. So you can see how a song that starts out with one voice and one guitar is gradually starting to build. There's another great example of this build as we head into the bridge, when not only do we get a snare drum being played with brushes coming into the mix, we also get that bright piano part being accompanied by a harpsichord of all things. You really have to listen for it, but it's simply playing the root chords. You can just hear its telltale decay in behind the mix. And again, this is played by Mike Campbell, and I love the mental image of them chatting over a coffee break, maybe, and Mike saying, "Hey, you know what would sound cool in the bridge? A harpsichord." And Tom saying, "Well, do you have one?" And Mike saying, "Of course." Because why wouldn't Mike Campbell have a harpsichord laying around in his garage? The bridge itself, though, is one thing that was changed from the demo version, which had the progression from the chorus of "To Find a Friend," rather than the iconic progression we end up with in the final version of Wildflowers. In the second verse, we get the addition of another instrument, again, very, very gently and subtly mixed in. A harmonium is also called a reed organ, and Ben Mont's addition of this new instrument, along with the introduction of a very quiet kick drum, maintains this slow march into the gentlest of crescendos. The final chorus then soars. There's no other verb I can use here. It's triumphant and it soars, but it doesn't beat you over the head with any element of itself. Ben Mont's arpeggiated piano part in that higher register adds a movement that cuts across that shuffled acoustic guitar rhythm to add a fantastic melodic counterpoint, and the addition of a vocal harmony makes this finale rich and full without ever sounding cluttered or overcooked. There's a sublime piece of production here too, with 2 separate harmony parts being mixed slightly into the left and right channels, with Tom's lead vocal straight down the middle. I think it's important too that Tom sings his own harmonies on this track. Howie Epstein was a remarkable harmony singer and contributes plenty of excellent backing vocals to this album, but this is Tom's second solo album, And at this point in the process, it must have been apparent to everyone that this wasn't just another record, that this was something special. So the decision to have Tom's be the only voice to open the record is both deliberate and a very specific choice to reinforce what this record is going to be right from the outset. It frames the entire rest of the record perfectly. This is the main reason I believe that this track had to open this record. It's as pure a distillation of Tom Petty as you ever get vocally and emotionally, and I'll talk about the lyrics after our Petty trivia break. The chorus ends with the reinforcing repetition of the line, "You belong somewhere you feel free." This is followed by a repeat of the bridge, and again, the song takes us into a slightly different place with the addition of Michael Kamen's sensationally subtle orchestration. Strings and woodwind only, I think, is all that's used, and it's used very sparingly, but again, it adds a slightly different texture to proceedings to take us out. Okay, folks, it's that time once again. It's time for a little Petty trivia. Your last Petty trivia question was this. Mary Jane's Last Dance was played live for the first time at which legendary LA venue? Is it A, the Whiskey A Go-Go, B, the Forum, C, the Viper Room, or D, the Greek Theatre? Well, the last time Tom and the Heartbreakers played the Whiskey A Go-Go was September 19th, 1982. The band played the song all 3 times they played the LA Forum after its release, in 2002 and twice in 2014. And they played it a total of 8 times at the Greek Theatre, including 3 dates on the 40th anniversary tour. The song's debut, however, was rather unexpectedly at the tiny venue opened by Johnny Depp and Sal Genko. On August 14th, 1993, the Viper Room opened its doors for the first time. The 250-person capacity venue was treated to a surprise as Tom and the Heartbreakers had agreed to play in support of the club's opening. The gig has also entered Petty lore as arguably one of the straws that finally broke the camel's back with Stan Lynch's tenure with the band. On learning that Stan had told management that he couldn't play the gig, Tom sent word back not to bother as he'd bring Ringo Starr in instead. Lynch was on a plane within 24 hours and took to the stage for the last time as a full member of the Heartbreakers. Only one known image from the gig exists as cameras were forbidden, and this was taken by Robert Seabury. Or Sebury? I'm not too sure you pronounce that name. I'll include a link to the photo in the episode notes if you'd like to see it, and I'm going to contact Rob to see if he'll talk to me about being at that gig and what that was like taking the only photo at it. Your question for this week is this. The immortal line, "Most things that I worry about never happen anyway," from Crawling Back to You, was originally intended for which song from the Wildflowers sessions? Is it A, To Find a Friend, B, Don't Fade on Me, C, You Don't Know How It Feels, or D, Somewhere Under Heaven? Okay, back to the song. Let's talk about the lyrics in this one. In the Wildflowers box set notes, Mike says that it's, and I quote, "just an acoustic love song of Tom's. We cut it relatively quickly." And while I wouldn't dream of questioning Mike's take on it, I think there's a much deeper meaning to this song. And Mike doesn't explicitly contradict my take on the lyrics, so I don't think we'll ever fall out about it. When you consider the nature of how this song poured out of Tom in one take on that demo recording, this song to me becomes a cathartic stream of consciousness. Tom told journalist David Frick of this period that my personal life came crashing down and it derailed me for a while. And you can interpret this song as Tom talking to himself and reminding himself that he does deserve happiness, that he does deserve to feel loved, to belong, and to be free. Of course, there's an extrinsic interpretation of him singing to someone else that's just as valid. He could be singing to a partner, to a child, to a friend, or to even to a parent. It's again that universality that pervades almost all of Tom's writing, even in the face of what I believe to be a deeply introspective piece of self-reflection on this particular song. And I often say there's at least one line in every Tom Petty song that I think is top-notch and really sets it apart. The lyrics in this one do expose their genesis, I think. You know, the repeat of certain elements in the verses and the repetition of "you belong" throughout would likely be worked on and shaped quite a lot of the time when you're writing a song, and especially when Tom was writing a song. But Tom clearly felt that this lyric was so strong, at least partially because it was so raw and so heartfelt. There isn't a ton of complexity or petty-esque wordplay or dexterity happening here. It's all about the impact of the simplicity of the statements in the song. You belong somewhere you feel free. You belong. There's a reason that he repeats you belong so often. That's coming from deep within himself. It's him saying you have worth, and more pointedly recognizing I have worth. That raw emotion is much more important than any linguistic sleight of hand that Tom could have found had he worked longer on the lyrics. We would have lost some of the stark beauty of listening to his truest inner voice. I talked about why I think Wildflowers had to be the lead track on this album, and I've already given you a few different reasons, but possibly the most important one is that line, you belong somewhere you feel free. As well as being an inner monologue surrounding probably the disintegration of his marriage and that relationship, for me, it also exposes Tom wanting to completely unshackle himself creatively and get away from the album tour cycle and the write the hit for the radio pressure and the rock star image and everything that had gone with his career up to this point. Somewhere you feel free, not only to live a life with love and happiness, but also with complete creative control and freedom. And if you think about the albums that Tom would go on to make from this point on in his career, there was never a backward glance at the trappings of superstardom or writing to a formula for guaranteed commercial success. It allowed Tom Petty to become the purest version of himself. In the lead up to this season, I promised you some thoughts about this album and each song on it from a guest. Today, I'm joined by a voice you haven't heard before, which is owned by a wonderful listener who's been with me on this journey from really early on. Mary Beth Donnolly is an educator and Petty fan who, like me, discovered the true depth of his catalogue later in life. I was thrilled to finally meet her in, virtual person, after having a great many social media conversations with her over the past couple of years. We talked about through lines in Tom's music, including one that features in this song, and of course her love of Tom's music generally. I'll be releasing more of my conversation with Mary Beth this Friday, including her answers to my 10 questions. But for now, let's listen to our conversation about Wildflowers.
I think you and I are close to about the same age. I'm 51.
Yep.
I hate saying that. I want to say that I'm 31 or something, but so I mean, I kind of knew who he. I probably not until like the Traveling Wilburys and Full Moon Fever, right? Like
Right.
I grew up with an older father who played a lot of big band music. So my father loved music as much as I love music. He loved music, but totally different.
Yeah.
And I always felt like you grew up in the 80s. We were like, I was like in a time warp because I was into 60s music. He was playing like World War II, like
Yeah.
movies, music. It was all. And my mother's almost a boomer. So she's born in 1943. She listened to more of, I guess, the music I came to like, but she didn't like music the way he did. Like he was obsessive about it,
Yeah.
vinyls and talking about it all the time and listening to it all the time and singing in the morning. And so I don't think I knew him in the 80s. We didn't have cable TV until like 88, 89, and that's around the time, right? The Traveling Wilburys, right? I
Yeah.
think that was my like intro. And then I feel like I sort of discovered him kind of during the pandemic, which is
Right.
about like 30 years later than everybody else. Um, but I think I told you I'm trying to remember the sequence of everything, but I feel like I picked up the anthology. It was the anthology, like in February of 2020.
Right.
And then I just started listening to it in the car, and I was like the only person in my family. My kids were still home, right? We got called back to work like in March of 2021. My
Yeah.
husband was like in between jobs. My kids were learning virtually, and I was like one of the few people that was on the road at that time, which says a lot. Northern Virginia is like known for its terrible traffic. And I just kept playing that. I think it was Two Gunslingers. I was like, how have I never heard this song? Like,
Yeah.
how have I never heard this song? And this is so much better than the stuff that was on the radio, in my opinion, right? And then I kind of, as I do, like start going down like a little bit of a rabbit hole. And I played a lot of Full Moon Fever, and it really, I don't know, it sort of just made a lot of sense for that time because I was very obsessed, and I still am. I will always love Paul Simon. I had sort of done this whole Paul Simon thing of seeing him 3 times on his final tour.
Cool.
I've seen him 8 times, But during the pandemic, his music was just it was just like a little too sad. It was a little too melancholy. And there was
Right.
something about petty stuff that was very, realistic and, but hopeful, a little jaded. I guess I liked his sort of jaded optimism. And it
Yeah.
was it was running down a dream of all things, right? Like I sort of pride myself on discovering offbeat tracks, but running down a dream really sort of made sense to me. Driving alone on the road and feeling like I
Yeah.
was the only one going to work every day at, 5 after 7 in the morning. Right? I had to be at work at 7:30 in the morning. So um, and then I just like this is the way I am with everything. I start getting interested in something and I'm like, I gotta figure out everything about this. And my family's like, okay, here we go again. Like last person before Tom Petty was Abraham Lincoln. I kid you not. Like I did the same thing with Abraham Lincoln, right? He got the same
Yeah.
treatment. Like I gotta
No.
know everything. I gotta read everything. I gotta, what's every speech? And I
Yeah.
took a class. I couldn't do that for this, but I don't know. Does that answer your question? So
Absolutely.
yeah.
But it's funny because we both did come to Petty a little bit later. We found him later on. And I think that I was talking, well, and you're talking about the anthology, the double disc. Me and John Paulson just last week recorded the greatest hits episode, and we were talking about greatest hits, and we sort of
Yeah.
brushed a little bit up against this. But the cool thing about that anthology is that there are some of those deeper tracks on, like Two Gunslingers, like, You're So Bad That You Might Not Have Heard if you weren't paying attention, like Jamming Me. We've got, Stop Dragging My Heart Around is on there. So there's Hometown Blues. There's some tracks on there that are outside that California Surf dude that is our initial impression of Tom once you see Full Moon Fever and you see MTV and, Big Canada Much Music and those kinds of things. So to get that sort of exposure, I think, what a gift there. Because maybe if you'd picked up the greatest hits and not the anthology, you would have sort of thought, okay, well, he's kind of a radio hit guy. But when you hear like, yeah, something like Two Gunslingers and you think, wow, what is this now? This is not really what I was expecting here, right? So then what was the journey from that to Wildflowers then? And do you remember sort of your first impressions of Wildflowers? Because I've got a theory on Wildflowers about people around about our age. I think it resonates differently.
I think you're probably right. Yeah, I've thought about that too. I have a theory about it too. I don't know if your theory is my theory, but well, then I went down. I did have the greatest hits actually. So I
Okay.
had the greatest hits, and I was sort of like, okay, I already know this, and it's on the radio all the time anyway. This is not really,
Yeah.
and I feel bad saying that because I'm sure if I saw it live now, I would totally appreciate it. But you're right that the anthology, something about the deeper tracks was like, there's a much more sensitive side to this guy that I didn't know,
Yeah.
right? And now I hear the greatest hit stuff and I can hear that sensitivity, but it sort of escaped me at first. Um, I guess because I started doing research, I started like Googling things and like, and then I think it must have been the re-release, right? The release of the double album. I think I
Right.
was a couple months behind for that, but not decades behind, right? So people were talking about it and I was like, what are they even talking about? I've never even heard of this. Wouldn't this have made the greatest hits? How do I not like
Yeah.
then none of this even sounds remotely familiar. And then I did I get the album for like I forget if I got the album or if I watched the documentary, but it felt like it was around this. I think I did get the album. I was like, well, I don't know what to expect from this, but everybody says this is great. So I want to hear what it's about. And then I was like just blown away. Right. I
Yeah.
just like, oh
Yeah.
my God, this is just amazing. This is like, like listening to Wake Up Time and, weeping in
Yeah.
my car. I mean, it was like kind of a tough time, right?
Yeah.
So I was probably a little sensitive about everything, but it just really, yeah. And my theory is like, well, this probably wouldn't have made sense to me when it came out and I was 22. This is like a middle-aged guy having some
Yeah.
sort of middle crisis probably, and it made sense, right?
Yeah.
That's my theory anyway.
For sure. I mean, and you'd said something when we were sort of chatting back and forth before this about, and I'll read out maybe what you said is thinking about Petty's catalog, Wildflower specifically, and how it's really the magnum opus of a theme he was always coming back to and what it reveals about him as an artist and as a soul. And I found that a really sort of intriguing idea that, yeah, Petty does come back to themes. He does come back to, you know, both hopefulness and forlornness. They're both there. My guest Ivan Anderson, I think it was season 4 or something, said that the three words to describe Tom Petty he used was verge of tears.
Oh
And it's not
gosh.
that, you know what I mean? And it's that idea that he there's that undercurrent Certainly, I think up to Wildflowers into Echo, that was there. That undercurrent of sadness was there. And even when he was singing sort of upbeat, happy songs, it was still just in the background. It was a little background noise. But then he managed, I think he put it to bed later in his career, and we get sort of Mojo and Last DJ and those kinds of things. They don't lean into that quite as much. But, you think about Room at the Top, or you think about Wildflowers, the song we're going to be talking about here. There's a real pain in those songs. So I think that those themes, I think you're dead right. So I don't know if you wanted to expand on that a little bit about what are the themes that you see Tom coming back to, and how does that resolve in Wildflowers?
Yeah, I actually pulled some out, like, knowing that we were gonna talk because, I'm a history teacher. Yes, political science major, American history minor, and, like, my favorite probably topic in history is abolition and, the fight against slavery, right? So
Yeah,
this is kind of like something I'm always thinking about. I can't wait to teach it. What do I do when it's over? I take summer classes about it. I mean, I don't know how long I've known you on Facebook, but like, if
yeah,
you went back, you would see like I did an Underground Railroad class. I did a Frederick Douglass class last year. I did another Frederick Douglass class a couple years ago. So this is just kind of like in my blood to like hear these things about wanting to be free and like, oh, wait, what did you say? Did you say you want to be free? And of course, it just like hits me hard, right? I feel like yes, that is something that all of his music was always kind of skirting the edge, and then I can give you like lots of examples, right? Like even going back to I don't know, I think Refugee might have been like maybe even American Girl, right? Just this idea of somewhere there's a better life, right?
yeah,
If you just keep and maybe what you're saying about Canada too, right? Here's this big land and surely everybody can find their place here, right?
yeah,
And I think he just keeps sort of saying that, right? Like you don't have to live like a refugee. You deserve better than that, right? Like
yeah,
this isn't you don't have to be trapped in this world that you grew up in and um can find I mean, I think Room at the Top is part of that too, right?
yeah,
So American Girl, Refugee, I was writing Learning to Fly, Two Gunslingers, King's
yeah,
Highway. I mean, I probably missed some, right? Free
yeah,
Falling, but it keeps coming back to this idea of like you don't have to be trapped. Like keep going, keep
yeah,
looking. I think California is part of that, right? And my some of my interpretation is affected by watching that Wildflowers documentary like several times, like probably 6 times. And I think it's his daughter that says that, right? That California was a refuge for him, right? That
yeah,
he had this tumultuous childhood and sort of felt like he got a second chance by moving away. And I mean, and I'm not trying to be ethnocentric when I say this, but it's just such an American story to say California is this land of freedom and new
of course, yeah,
opportunity, right? I mean, people that's why it became so populated so fast was because of gold. And here he is in the 1970s, sort of discovering California as kind of this place where he can find refuge, can find haven. But I think Wildflowers was the most it's not shrouded at all. It's like
yeah,
the best thing that I could wish for you it's like him giving a gift to somebody. The best thing I could wish for you is that you find a place where you feel free, and I think that's just beautiful, right? It's just such
yeah.
a beautiful sentiment.
Well, and it is that underpinning of this album because, the documentary is called Somewhere You Feel Free. That's the line in Wildflowers that came to him spontaneously because that lyric is all ad-libbed as we know now, which is astonishing. That's just that doesn't happen. That shouldn't happen. And no one should be able to write a song that good on the fly. Of course, it's petty,
It's
so
not
but
fair.
when you look back at it, and he really is, I think he even says to Paul Zollo, I'd have to go back and find the quote exactly. He said, I was kind of singing to myself, you belong
Yeah.
somewhere, you feel free, but so this is the culmination of that idea of freedom, right? But of course, like he's been battling with professional freedom about around the labels. He's battling, like you said, a bad childhood. He's been battling like a bad marriage where he's not been able to sort of be comfortable in his marriage. So all those things, all his life, almost like it's almost everything leads to Wildflowers, and this is the start of the catharsis that he needs to get through it. And that culminates with Echo, which is a very, very sad record, and obviously didn't play very often. But that whole process of just getting all this out, this first song on Wildflowers, the title track, it's just the starkest, barest statements of that explicitly. We've had inference to it in the past. Well, now he's just openly saying, I just need freedom is something personal freedom in love, in life, in career. These are the things that I crave.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's like a thesis statement for his whole career, right? It's like
Yeah.
saying, "This is it, right? This is what I stand for." And you're right. I think even the sparseness of it, which spoke to me as somebody who, really likes folk rock and
Yeah.
just the simplicity of just a guitar is like, this is amazing. And then, then from there I just kept going, right? Like that
Yeah.
was sort of but I think even the cover kind of spoke to me because my husband and I got married in October and we had these like invitations that I swear were almost the same shade of brown with like a flower on it. And we had like we didn't have the fanciest flowers, but we wanted and we found this like sort of hippie florist and she put like wheat stalks and lots of sunflowers and we just were so happy with like our floral arrangement that it was kind of earthy and so I know it's kind of cheesy, but that spoke to me too, right? Like on a
Yeah.
personal level. But then I just realized, yeah, this is a theme he keeps talking about. Even in the even in that album, the higher place, right? We gotta go. We gotta go.
Yeah.
It's always about kind of like trying to escape and find the higher ground and leave by
Yeah.
night. I'm turning my head because I'm looking at my other
Oh
computer,
yeah.
right? Find somewhere that's dry. We've got to run. Um, there's just a lot of that, like I think it's both hopeful, but it speaks to a certain level of despair, right? That you
Yeah.
feel like you have no choice but to run away. So,
Well, and I think that's where, thankfully, eventually he ran into Dana, and you sort of see once, we know the background of Echo, the album Echo, where there's addiction problems and there's a lot going on at that time in his life. Once he gets clear of that, you do. That's where I think that change in his music happens after Echo. It is free. It sounds free. It sounds like an artist who's not carrying all this stuff around anymore and is finally free to just really, really enjoy making music for the sake of doing it. He's not chasing a chart hit. He's not worrying about whether the label loves the record or not. I mean, the last DJ certainly doesn't care whether the label loves it. So it's this
right,
idea where he's finally got this freedom. But I think that if you don't know the story, I don't think that comes out. And I think that's when people like me and you who came to him late and maybe have that tendency to really obsess over something when we find something we love, is you can see that big narrative a lot more clearly than if maybe you were a long time listener, but were really just listening to the songs and rather than consuming this whole story almost in sort of one piece, right? You really do see it
right,
very narratively.
right.
Does that
And
make
it made
sense?
me go back and appreciate some of the earlier stuff.
Hmm.
Like that's when I said, I mean, I always liked Refugee because it's just a great rocker, right? I mean, it's just a great.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, I heard it differently. I was like, oh, this is about wanting to get the hell out of Dodge, right? That's what.
Yeah. Of
And I mean, we have moments like that, right? I'm raising a
course.
teenager who I mean, I think I wrote about this in my essay, right? Who has kind of a tempestuous personality, and there's some mornings I was like, I gotta go, and I just blast my music as I then deal with middle schoolers, right, 5
Yeah.
miles away, and in between, I have this 15 minutes of like trying to find sanity and
Yeah.
sanctuary in my
Yeah.
mind. So.
Okay, Pennyheads, that's it for this week. It was fun to listen back to my chat with Mary Beth while I was editing this episode, and I'd like to say a huge thanks to her for her excellent insights and ideas around these broader concepts that Tom seemed to hold as waypoints throughout his career. It was also interesting to see how many of the ideas we discussed filtered through into my thoughts on the song, and I think there's a definite consistency between what I thought going into this conversation with Mary Beth and what I ended up writing for today's episode, which I did before I went back and listened to this conversation. During the filming of the Somewhere You Feel Free documentary, album producer Rick Rubin had this to say about this week's track. If you think of the song Wildflowers, if you don't analyze it, if you just think of it, I think of it as a solo acoustic song. It's Tom playing guitar and singing, and that's what that song is, when in reality, maybe 50 different events happen over the course of that song. And those little elements that happen, none of them draw attention to themselves. And if you're not listening, it just sounds like guitar, but it's reinforced with these different colors that keep it very interesting and compelling, and without knowing, makes you want to listen to it over and over again. Now, that quote has stuck with me since I first heard it, and is something that is true of so many of Tom's songs, especially on Wildflowers, and most especially the title track. It was also a feature of the work Tom did with Jeff Lynne, that trick of being able to hide gold deep down in the seams of a song without it shining so brightly that your eye is drawn immediately to it. From the astonishingly organic origin of this song through to the meticulous crafting of it into a masterpiece, Wildflowers transcends genre and time to sit almost unrivaled in Tom's catalogue as one of the most timeless pieces of music he or any other artist has ever committed to tape. It's beautiful, it's profound, and as Rick Rubin said, you want to listen to it over and over again. It also reminds me of the 3 words my guest Ivan Anderson used to describe Tom Petty: verge of tears. There's a retrospective sadness to this song when you think of Tom having to reassure himself that he belongs among the Wildflowers, somewhere he feels free. In the Wildflowers and All the Rest booklet, Ryan Ulyadi says that Tom told me he was driving down from Santa Barbara and he looked up on the hill and saw those wildflowers. He thought to himself, that's a good title. This is the inspiration part of the song. So let's talk about the perspiration. I'll restate this line. All those little elements that happen, none of them draw attention to themselves. Hands up, everyone who'd noticed that kick drum or the harpsichord or the brush snare not being there until it was. Everything about the way this song is crafted sneaks up on you. It's a masterclass in how you take an idea and flesh it out into a fully-fledged tour de force piece of art. And that's not to say that this song isn't wonderful when played on just an acoustic guitar or on a piano with just the vocal accompaniment. It's a great song in its bones, but it's dressed in such elegant musical finery that it becomes this dazzling, breathtaking thing of beauty. It's one of the very few songs that I don't think the Heartbreakers topped during live performances. They did equally brilliant versions of it, but the full majesty of a song is sometimes realized in the studio, and this song falls into that category for me. There probably isn't an easier 10 out of 10 in this catalogue, in my opinion, and so, of course, that's where I'm going to go. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. Go check us out on Twitter at DeepDivePodNet. I'm sure you'll find something there that you like. You can also check out my other podcast, Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I do with my best friend Randy Woods. You can also check out the Ultimate Catalog Clash that I co-host with the hardest working man in podcasting, Corey Morissette. Right now, we're covering the Foo Fighters, and we just, as I'm recording this, we've just released side B of The Colour and the Shape. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Twitter at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe as applicable, and again, do please leave a review or a rating if you would like to, and if you haven't already done that. Keep talking to me on social media, and I will try to read out most of your comments on the show. And as a weekly reminder, the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. When you're looking for Tom's music, please visit official streaming platforms, or even better, go to your local independent record seller and grab some physical media. If you're looking for official merchandise, go to tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merchandise for this show, please go to tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook if you're not already a member. They're great fan communities and well worth spending some time in. Also, check out Tom Petty Radio, which is channel 31 on Sirius XM, for all the pettiness you can handle. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about the second iconic track from this album, You Don't Know How It Feels. Bye-bye.